Welcome everybody to the Dallas FMPug meeting for Friday, November 3rd. Can't believe it's November already, 2023. And before we go ahead and get started and hand this off to our day's speaker, I'm just going to go ahead and get some announcements out of the way. As most of you probably already know, Engage registration is now open. If you go to the Claris website, it will have a link to get there. It will also show a list of all of the available / promoted hotels in the area that you'll be able to use for accommodations. Some, but not all, of the Claris certifications are out. It looks like all of the basic certifications, all the basic certifications, which are known as associate certifications, are now available. That's for Claris FileMaker Pro, Claris Connect, and Claris FileMaker Server. We have a specialist test available for and certification available for Pro and for Connect, and coming soon on Server, and then all of the expert level certifications are still yet to come. And if there's nothing else that anybody wanted to make sure that we got announced, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to Heather, our speaker for the day, with her presentation, My FileMaker Cornucopia. Take it away, Heather.
So it turns out that my original title for today, which was the FileMaker Cornucopia of a Seasoned Developer, was too long to fit in the lower portion of the slide theme that I chose. So instead, I'll just be sharing my FileMaker Cornucopia. I chose this topic because it's a seasonally appropriate symbol, and I like icons and symbols and graphics. And the Latin-derived word cornucopia, aka horn of plenty, is defined as an abundant supply of good things of a special kind. So it seemed only appropriate that I share some of the FileMaker tools and techniques that I use on a regular basis to improve my own experience and efficiencies as an architect and developer of complex systems, while I seek to expand on the functionality being delivered, enhance performance, and encourage consistency. And for anyone joining us today or in the future through the magic of YouTube, or wherever the recordings are hosted, if you're not already familiar with me, you might wonder why it is that I think I might have a few things to share. Well, okay, so I have over 35 years of FileMaker experience, 10 of which were in-house, and for the other 25, I've earned my living solely as a professional developer, and during this time, I spent 7 years with my own company in North Carolina, Osprey Associates, and I've been with Harmonic now for over 18 years. I may have teethed on FileMaker 2, which you see there, but I am fully certified in all versions from 7 forward. In other words, I might have a thing or two to share. It's also true that not everything I share will necessarily be new to everyone who is watching this. The most important lessons that I've learned are what I wanted to share first. I'll get into some tools and techniques, scripts, etc., but I really wanted to share some of the most important lessons that I've culled. The first is value. Value your talent and charge accordingly. For those of you who haven't heard this story, when I started in 1999 as a professional developer, I charged $30 an hour. And then I charged $40 an hour. And I thought that was amazing, like amazing money. I mean, that's like, if you work, that's like 80 grand a year. I mean, forget about taxes, but that was huge. But what I found is that clients argued a lot, and they didn't always pay attention to what I was telling them, even though I did know what I was talking about. So I raised my rate to $100 an hour, and people stopped arguing with me. And
really?
Yes. So when you value your time and your talent, so will your clients. Next, I want you to listen carefully to what your client and their users are saying. Not just so that you can deliver what they're asking for, but so you can identify what they actually need. Then you'll need to be prepared to make the case for what they need when it differs from what the ask is. Like a partner who understands their business and wants to support them with truly impactful solutions. Be on their side, but convince them that they're wrong. Okay. If your projects don't already start with a design phase, it's time to rethink your process. Beginning with a billable, probably fixed price design phase, where your deliverable will provide not only a more accurate estimate for the project, but will also set realistic expectations for that project ahead. Once you've got that project, iterate your work. Share your progress and any departures from your design phase proposal with your client, and when appropriate, with end users. This will allow you to gain valuable feedback along the way, which of course requires that you communicate. Communicate with your customer regularly throughout the process. And for clients with active projects, we at Harmonic set a standing weekly meeting time to ensure regularly scheduled updates and feedback loops. Be sure to document your work. Always, 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 please. Pretty please. And maintain your development environment to maximize your productivity. This includes everything from standardizing your naming conventions, and honestly, I don't care which naming convention you follow, but pick one or come up with one and stick with it. And if you bring on or work with other developers, make sure that they understand it and they follow it too. If you've got a system where all of your table occurrences have really short names because you've come up with an amazing magical way to make that happen, make sure everyone else knows that so you don't start seeing things that are, blowing up your screen. Okay. So from standardizing your naming conventions and organizing your layouts and scripts to follow what I consider to be GGH, or good graph hygiene. So
that's not relevant at all.
most of our low-code team is all here, right? Okay, good. Remember this. I think I'm going to get a big poster. We'll find a good place to put it. Good graph hygiene. So, to explain what I mean by good graph hygiene, I'm going to use this simple example from one of our own solutions. This has only a few base tables, which makes it a great example. Now, the first thing that I do in a graph like this is add some color so that I can easily recognize the base tables. This becomes a little more difficult when you have much more complex graphs with many, many more table occurrences or base tables. What I try to do in those cases is I will, if you look at that scale of colors that you get in the picker from FileMaker, let's say I'm choosing yellow. Well, I'll just go down the, okay, at this level is this color, and this level is that color. If they're too close together, I'll skip a color. But try to keep it, so we can recognize accounting versus, customers, etc. It will make your job much easier, and anyone else's as well. So that's the first thing I do. The next thing I do to this graph is I find in each, you'll notice everything is in columns, which I'll explain in a moment. But the first thing I do in something like this is I find the widest table occurrence in each column. And you'll notice that none of those table occurrences are abbreviated. None of them have been cut off because I want to see the full name when I'm looking at the graph. I don't want to have to select them or hover over them to find out what their name is. I want to actually see the name even if it's long, which is why we don't like long names. But I want to see the whole thing. So if they are different widths, then they're going to be different widths. So I select the widest one from each column, and then I use the tool, which I didn't include in the screenshot here, but I use the distribute horizontally tool, and I distribute those, in this case, how many? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I picked 5 fields starting from the left to the right. Now it turns out there's a couple of really wide table occurrences in there, and so I actually had to take my rightmost table occurrence and I had to scoot it a little farther to the right and then redistribute them. After that, I align all the other table occurrences in the same column with the table occurrence that I distributed. And I end up with something that's a lot cleaner, like this. Now, it's okay to stretch the graph out a little bit. That's okay, as long as everything stays clean. Now, in addition to having a clean graph that's pleasing to the eyes, there are a few other details I'm going to point out to you. First, in the upper left corner, which I really can't point to, I don't have a pointer, but in the upper left corner, you'll see some solo table occurrences. I like to keep those together somewhere on the graph. It doesn't matter if they're on the upper left, upper right, lower. It doesn't matter where they are as long as they're together and they're not mixed in with the crowd. Okay? These are likely either utility tables or they're tables that haven't been integrated into the graph yet, in which case I want to be able to find them. Okay. Next, I like to start with my primary context either on the left or in the middle. Because this is a small graph, I've started on the left. So we've got counts, I can't read it, counts on the left. And then I branch out from there with each level of the relationship branch in its own column. In some cases, there may be a relationship that is directly underneath, there may be a table occurrence directly under another that's a child, but typically I will put them in separate columns, okay? Now this becomes I missed a step here. In the second column, if you look closely, or walk up there to the screen, you'll find that everything within each branch is alphabetized. And this becomes increasingly important as your graph grows.
Increasingly.
Not as difficult as you might think.
Well, just moving things around.
Yeah, so I'll talk about that in a moment. Moving now to the third column, you'll see that each subpath is also alphabetized. Anytime you've got a branch with more than one table occurrence, they should be alphabetized. Unless they are otherwise grouped in some way, right? You might have a comment note behind a group that is not alphabetized within the overall set, but is a subgroup of its own, right? So you may have table occurrences that logically belong together but aren't alphabetical. So you can group those separately. And that's fine as long as there is something that indicates that, like a note behind it. So it's clear not only to you when you have forgotten what you did yesterday or months ago or years ago, but to anybody else. So these simple guidelines will make life much easier for yourself and for future developers, which, by the way, will probably be you. Notice also that the table occurrences here are all collapsed. This is because uncollapsed table occurrences tend to become unwieldy, and they can block your view to other table occurrences. If you are working on a project with other developers, this becomes even more important because someone else may be coming in to do something, especially on a large complex graph. You may be working on customers and someone else is working on invoices. And they come in to do some work, but they can't find their table occurrences because your open table occurrences have covered up all the relationship lines. So clean up after yourself when you've been in a graph. And my thinking on that, and you'll see this in just a moment, is that open table occurrences are either for very, very simple graphs with very little on them, or very simple subsections of a graph, subgraphs within the larger graph, or an open table occurrence means we're still working on this. We haven't hooked it all up yet, okay? The last thing I'm going to point out on this image is the even distribution, which then each group of table occurrences. Use the tools that FileMaker provides you to line things up either to the left or right, whichever direction you're working with, and use the distribution so that things are just easier to visualize, your eyes can get through them more easily. And you'll notice, for example, in, I think it's the second column, the top three table occurrences are all evenly distributed. And then the next group, and so on. And down at the bottom, you'll see where you see differences is where you have larger branches coming off of one of those table occurrences. So a little more room is allowed. To your point about how difficult it is to move things and change the graph, you'll notice that this section to the lower right here, the pink one, and I can't read what it is from here. Oh, it's gone. Anyway, I will take subsections or branches of a graph and make sure that they don't overlap with branches from another part of a graph. And the reason for that is that it makes it a whole lot easier if I have to make the graph longer because I added one table occurrence too many. All I have to do is grab from that point down, or a section, and move it. And then maintaining it is not nearly as hard as it seems. Okay, so this graph here is one of our more complex graphs, and it doesn't look too bad though. I mean, it's got a lot going on, but it looks like you could probably find what you were looking for. If anybody asks me about anchor buoy or spider web or whatever, just we do what we need to do. Right? And sometimes this is what we need to do. But you'll see that it's still fairly well organized. And the large section, the large yellow section at the bottom, right, that has all open table occurrences. I didn't build that section. Somebody else is, and it's my assumption that they're still working on it. Okay. But those are fine, and I'm fine with that, even though they may stay open forever, because they're not in the way of anything else that I might be working on.
Heather, can you take a question?
Absolutely. Let me turn my volume up here so I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, I can take a question.
I basically have two questions. One is that when you were talking before about arranging your table occurrences alphabetically,
Yes.
And I noticed that your scheme of how you do it is an exact copy of the way I do it. So thank you for that. I've noticed that if you have your other managed database tabs like tables and fields sorted by field name or table name alphabetically,
Yes.
that the items in your graph tend to respect whatever that preference was, even though you can't set it in the graph. And if you want these things to stay alphabetical, I find that keeping it sorted by field name almost does it automatically so that the lines to the branches don't crisscross over one another.
That is more of an issue if you have open table occurrences, right? So I will say that you've reminded me of why I started doing things alphabetically. I initially started alphabetizing the table occurrences so that the lines didn't cross, right? So that they were alphabetized in a way that matched the foreign keys that they were being matched to, right? So if I have let's say a line item, and that line item has to connect to a participant and an expense and, you know, batch and God knows what else, right? There's going to be a lot of foreign keys in that line item. So I have found in the past that I would sometimes actually, keeping that in mind would impact my decision about what I would name that foreign key, right? So that lines wouldn't cross. Yeah.
Heather, could you?
My second question, if this goes to a slide you haven't done yet, I'll wait.
Okay. Okay.
But it is, do you have a method of identifying the table occurrences that have cascading deletes?
Oh, yeah. So I've tried, and I haven't been consistently successful with that. And in part because the projects we work on at Harmonics are almost always multiple developers, and so, well, I might have a great idea about how I'll keep track of it. That doesn't mean other people will. What I have tried in the past is to add a note and make it the smallest size you can possibly make it, but make it red, and put it on the side of the relationship next to, almost like a little red button right next to the table occurrence that has the delete on the relationship. Unfortunately, I've never been able to size them just right. Not consistently. So no, there isn't a great way to do that. There also isn't a great way to document changes you've made on the graph other than adding a note, which is fine when you first make it, but you know, I see some notes in here, actually the one that's on the screen right now, if you blew it up really big, you'd probably find a yellow note or two in there that have dates that are 2 years old, that somebody added this branch, right?
I've considered using color as a way to indicate cascading deletes,
right.
But it's, you know, hit or miss.
Well, what you will notice, even though everything's super tiny here, what you will notice is that there are segments. And I do have all of the major table occurrences, primary table occurrences opened up. I have their table occurrences open so that we can see them on this giant graph. So you can see everything that's coming off of them. And you can see that they are all kind of centralized in the same area. And if you were to look closely, you would see that while this red one down towards the bottom, just above the purple, if that is collapsed, I can literally select that entire subsection and move it without touching any other part. So these graphs can get pretty spread out, but it's worth it. It's worth it, because what you don't want is to try to find what you're looking for here.
Right.
And you've even cut off the graphs, not even showing the whole thing.
I'm not even showing the whole thing. That would just, I mean, I don't want anyone to have a stroke.
PTSD, Heather.
What's that?
You're triggering my PTSD.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
You can see efforts to organize it at some point.
Well, actually, if you understood what this was, you would notice that starting with this, and I'm pointing on mine and you can't see it, but let's see, third column from the right, the orange just below the purple. If you follow that kind of to your left across and up a little and then across, you will see these green tables. Probably the best way to see it, maybe from the left, you see the fan coming off of, it's got a lot of green coming off. It looks like a really nice spiderweb fan over there. If you follow that green table occurrence across to the right, you will see other green ones at the same level. Like originally, this was a super, super clean graph. It had this clean line straight across the top, and it reached down to all these things in the lower right, which you can see are pretty well organized. But then a whole bunch of other stuff got squeezed in there, and nobody bothered to okay, well, let's bring it down a little, make room for these things. And I've had situations in here where the table occurrence I'm looking for is literally underneath another table occurrence. And these are collapsed, and I still can't see that there's stuff under it. So yeah, you don't want to do this. So good graph hygiene. I've spent more time on that than I should, but
so long you know exactly where it's at, and then somebody goes and rearranges it, you're like, where did it go?
right. But if everybody follows kind of those same guidelines, you can use different colors. You can, do certain things differently that work for your section of the graph that you own. But in general, yeah. And so what I find is when I do, you were talking about it's a pain to change it and to make the graph bigger. But if you organize it right and you provide space around the islands of functionality that you have in your graph, it's much, much easier. Much, much easier. Okay, moving on. Let's take a look at some custom functions that I use. So I will admit it's super simple, even bordering on a bit lazy, but the very first custom function that I add to each new file is not empty.
I knew it.
You knew it. You know me long enough. Okay, so super simple. Anyone can do it, right? But you're probably wondering why. Why would I bother with a shortcut that literally saves 3 keystrokes? Okay? I'm speaking only for myself, of course. I would never speak in double negatives like this, right? I would never ask someone if their basket is empty, right? It just feels stilted and awkward.
Yep.
And I know that there are some out there who use this exact same calc in a custom function that they call is full.
Woohoo! I'm not saying anybody here in this room has ever done that.
And I don't know anyone in this room that has made that calc, made that custom function. Now, this makes sense in the context of full being the opposite of empty. Okay? But what if the basket is neither full nor empty?
It's Schrodinger.
So you're saying is full is using the entire character set that's allowed by FileMaker.
It's like in order to in my thinking, to say it is full means that I have to know what's the maximum capacity and that I've tested that it meets it, that it is in fact full. Okay. If you ask someone if their shopping cart was full and it only had 2 items in it, they would say no. Okay.
I think we discussed this for like
In SQL,
3
the word
years.
is null.
We're still discussing.
Well, null would be empty and not null. That I could buy, right? I could buy that, but we're not using null in FileMaker. We're using is empty. So this is why I prefer not empty, because it could be full or partially full. It's just not empty. And it's super quick too, because since we can now do type ahead in our calc engine, all you have to do is like NO and boom, it's there, or EM and it's there, right there. So that is a super simple one, first thing that goes in. And I know that it's caught on because almost everyone else at Harmonic uses it too. So, okay, the next one is server. This is another simple one. It's obviously just using FileMaker functions to get the result, but it returns a Boolean value. It's either 1 or 0. And when you're running a script that needs to perform one way on server and one way not, like do we show the dialog or do we not? Or do we show the dialog and forget to check where we are?
Themselves and run themselves on server.
Exactly. I'm getting to that.
Sorry.
No cheating. I did say that not everything here would be new to everyone, right? Okay, and these aren't difficult or complicated, but we use them all the time. They're incredibly, incredibly valuable. Who wants to remember all of that? I don't want to remember that.
I hate having to look things up. I feel like a real amateur when I have to look things up.
Exactly. Okay, the next one is front tab. Now, clearly, again, there is a FileMaker function that will let you find that. Do I ever remember exactly what that function is or what's the specific name of the object attribute I'm looking for? Nope. I know they're there and I can look them up, but I don't remember them off the top of my head, and I use this kind of thing all the time. Primarily when we're using sliders. When we're using sliding panels and we want, for example, navigation to be on a button that is outside the boundary of the panel itself, click something to go to a panel. It looks like a tab, but it's not a tab, it's more efficient. But I want to be able to show that, in fact, it's active. Or maybe I have something in the header or the footer or somewhere off to the side that's not within the slider panel that should only be visible to the user when they're on a specific panel, right? I use isFrontTab.
Awesome.
I have another similar one, and it's isTabActive, I think is what it's called, because you can have more than one tab in the front at the same time, and it'll allow you to test things.
You're talking about 2 separate tabs.
Right. 2 separate slider panels, for example.
Sorry, slider.
You could use this on tabs too, but tabs show the tab. I haven't found the need for it on a tab. Right? But anyway, I find this very, very useful. Also for conditional formatting, like I said with buttons. We also use a build custom function. Now we've tried a couple different ways of doing this. We've tried storing this detail about a build version in a field in a record somewhere, and then like doing a SQL query to get it so we don't have to worry about context. Or I won't get into all of the trials and tribulations that we've gone through, but what we've settled on and what we're using right now is just a custom function that populates a JSON, and we can pull from that from anywhere at any time. And we do, like you see down there, we actually show the build number and the date of the build on the home page or the landing page, whatever you want to call it, when users come in to the system. So they know which build it is, and when we're working in staging, for example, it's going to be a different build number that we're looking at. Did you have a question? You look like you have a question. You look like You're questioning something
So I
you
see
see
that
there.
you're setting the element here,
Right.
and you're setting it as, how are you retrieving?
We just do a get JSON get element
Okay.
from that custom function.
Oh, from the custom function?
Yep.
Okay, so the custom function sets itself?
Yep. Yep.
Interesting, okay.
And some JSON can be a performance issue when they're really, really long, because of course it has to read from beginning to end to make sure it's all valid before it can pull anything. But this is such a short piece of JSON that it's a non-issue. But every time we do a build, the last thing we do is we update the build custom function in production.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is a manual step that we have to do. It doesn't like just automatically know.
So it basically builds itself every time you call it?
It builds itself every time you call it.
Okay.
Right, so we just update the custom function when we do a cutover for a new build.
Gotcha.
Now this next one I love. This is on last record, which again is another simple test, a simple combination of FileMaker native functions that says I'm on the last record. The reason this is important has nothing to do with UI, really. I mean, yeah, sure, maybe you don't want to show the, if I have, for example, I use a nav menu with, first, last, so on. I want to hide the last one when I'm on the last record, right? I want to hide the first one when I'm on record number 1, because there's nowhere to go from there. But that's not really what this is used for. This is used to prevent the error log on a server from being polluted by what I would call false negatives. But the way FileMaker works, they're not really false. So what happens is when FileMaker is doing a loop, and your last step of the loop is often go to record next with exit after last on, right? Well, the way that FileMaker knows that it's the last one is that it tries to go to the new record and it fails. Tries to go to the next record and it fails. That error gets logged. And I have spent a lot of time looking through logs looking for real errors. And
Right.
I got tired of them. So I started using this. I created this and started using it. And I just put I put an exit loop if on last record immediately before that go to next record. And no more errors get logged because it'll exit the script. It won't test for it. It knows. So super simple. Little bit effort. Little logs.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. The next is a series. We have more than these 3, but these are the 3 I use the most. The first one is valpause. And you can see there that the documentation is like 5 times the size of the actual calc, right? Basically, what this is doing is giving you the position of whatever value, whatever line you're looking for. Is it there? Now, if it happens to be on the 3rd line or the 5th line, it's going to return 3 or 5 or whatever. Personally, I don't care which line it is. I just want to know that it's true, that it's not 0, right? So I use this to test for where other people might test for is valid, which is full of potential issues I won't get into here, but I prefer this for testing if something is present. Just do a val pause. I can do it on an array. I can do it on just a single field. I can do it on a related record. It either is or it isn't there. Gives me an answer. Now, middle val is the next one. And it's just using FileMaker's middle values, but it's doing just a little bit more because anything plural, any FileMaker function that's plural, like this, middle values, middle words, whatever, will have a trailing character. I don't want the trailing character. And I don't want to have to strip out the trailing character every time I grab a list of something or a list of values, whether they're the first values or last values, right values, left values, middle values. We don't want them. So we use middle val. And we use this when we're looping through a stack primarily. So we're looping through a stack. We've got a stack of IDs. And we're going to do something in a loop with those IDs. And at the start of the loop, we're going to pull the first ID. And we're going to say, this is my ID. this is this ID. And then we need to decrement that, we need to remove it from the stack that we had. Now, I've seen a lot and I've used a lot of different variations of ways of doing that. And Steve wrote this, write val remain. And it is the best that I've seen. It literally just takes everything but the first value that you just pulled off the list, that you just pulled off the stack. And it just always works. And it doesn't have a trailing character at the end, et cetera, et cetera. So when we're looping through a stack of IDs, we just pull that one that we're going to use, and then we replace that variable with the right val remain of our stack.
I have one that I built that does removing an item from the list
Right.
when you are wanting to just take it out. And you don't know if it's at the end of the list, at the beginning of the list, or the middle, and it does something similar.
I have a custom function. I didn't include it here. I probably should have. I have a custom function I call add remove.
Oh, see, you should.
I should have. Add remove will add it if it's.
D1.0.
It will. Here we go. Add remove will add it to the list, add it to the stack if it's not there, and if it's there, it'll take it away. It's basically a toggle for a specific ID out of a stack. And I know that Brian's familiar with that. Yes. So val pause is used primarily in, well, it's not used primarily anywhere. Val pause is used all over the place because it's a good way to just test for something being present. I have seen another custom function that's somewhere in our systems that's like value exists, and it is literally the exact same calc. So that's something you do have to watch out for when you have a lot of developers working in the same systems. But anyway, but middle val and right val remain are used primarily in looping scripts, recursive functions, and whiles. Yes,
One of the things
Eric.
I'll add on the val pause thing. One of the ways that I have leveraged that custom function is through a relationship. I need to see, is there a related record that has some value in field A?
Right.
And if it exists, then I want to use get nth record to pull the value out of field B in that same record.
Yes.
So val pause, using that,
Yeah.
it'll, instead of giving me just a Boolean that I then have to check to see, okay, now which record is it? I go val pause and it returns 5, and immediately I can go get nth record 5.
I'm
Right.
glad you mentioned that because I just said something that's untrue a moment ago. And I said value exists is the exact same calc. It's not, because value exists does not tell you which value it is. It just returns the Boolean. There's one part of it that's different, but most of it's the same, but it just returns a Boolean. So yeah. So the next custom functions that I use a lot are set and assign. I don't know, well, everyone here that's from Harmonic on the FileMaker team is familiar with these. In the FileMaker community, the set function is not named set, it's just pound. But pound doesn't tell me what it does. So I renamed it to set, because set literally sets a value pair as a variable. So you can load your parameters, submit your parameters with multiple set functions, and they just go in as set this and set that and set this and set that. There's no lists or anything involved, just this and this and this. And it will convert it to the proper name value pair format that can be read and interpreted by the assign function, which I did not rename. That one is named and is in the public domain. In fact, I think you will see some names on there. I think Daniel Smith was the first one, and then Jeremy, or see, Daniel and somebody else, and Jeremy did that. But we use those a lot. Now, there has been some transition, though, since we have FileMaker native JSON readability now. And so some developers prefer to provide all of their parameters as JSON. And that's fine too, as long as it's clear and that you are using them consistently. So we have scripts where the very first step in the script is assign get script parameter. We even have one called assign parameter. It's even simpler. Yes, Daisy.
Robert and I created a set JSON, assign JSON.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So you just pass in the JSON and then you assign JSON, and it builds out every variable in that JSON stack, so you don't have to do it multiple
Nice,
times.
I like that. You'll have to tell me what file that's in. So the set and assign are used exclusively for scripting. They can be used in different ways in the scripting, but we use them also for passing a result from a subscript back. So we exit with the result being set, some value pair. And then on the parent end, after the script runs, we perform a set variable, assign, get script result, right? So we use the set and assign a lot. What you want to be careful of, though, is if you transition from set and assign model to JSON model, but you want to use the same scripts that other people are using, you might run into situations where it is either more efficient for you to go back to set and assign, or you're going to have to duplicate your work in the script, in the subscripts that are getting the parameters so that everything is read properly. That's not difficult to do, but you may reach a point where that's a decision that has to be made, which way do we want to go. So things need to be consistent. Okay, next. So this one, again, super simple. And I created this based on a pet peeve of mine, which is account names and usernames are sometimes the same, but not always. And when you have a team of developers working in the same system and everyone logs in as developer.
Never happens.
Right. We can't see who it actually was. Which developer was it? So I started including both account name and username in some places, in some audit trails, for example. But all the times that they're exactly the same, that's redundant, right? And that just got annoying. So I created account user, and it will use one if they're the same. It'll return one name if they're the same, or both if they are different. It's just a little bit cleaner, and I like things cleaner. Okay, I also have several custom functions that are a little more than frequently used shortcuts. But I and my team use them all the time because they're quick. I prefix these with a bullet, which unfortunately you can't do on the PC unless you copy it from the Mac and then paste it in on the PC side, which I have been known to do a few times. So I prefix these with a bullet character, primarily so that they appear at the top of the list when you're looking for something, right? And if I'm on a Mac, I can just put in bullet and I get my list of shortcuts right there. The most frequently used of these is error. Again, it's just get last error is what's behind it. But to test for error, I just have to type in ER and it comes up, it's there, and I don't have to type get and then error. It's just quicker. I just put in error, and I don't even have to say error equals 0. I can say not error, or if error, do nothing else, do something, right? Very easy. The next one that I use the most is probably choice, which is just get last message choice. But again, quicker and simpler to enter and use. And because it returns a number, just like the get last message, I can if my dialogue is in a loop or something, I can change what my buttons say based on the last choice, etc., using choose. And I also use today in some files, which is simply, I'm not showing it here, but it's simply get current date, right? Does anyone here remember when FileMaker included a today function?
Yes, I missed those days.
So does anyone remember how severely it impacted your performance? You would open a file and you would be met with a dialogue saying, reevaluating today for every record in your system that has a field that uses today in its count. Not fun. So in this case, the get current date as a custom function, unless you made the unwise choice to put it in an unstored calc, okay, this version is no problem. And I use it for anytime we need to say, how old is this, and we need to know it now and not stored, then I use today. Okay, next is mod key. If you provide alternate behaviors to your power users like shift select or option select, you need to keep in mind that both the get active modifier keys and get trigger modifier keys are plural. So what they actually return is the combined value of all selected mod keys. So while we tend to remember that 1 equals shift and 8 equals option, if they're things that we give to people all the time, we can find it easy to forget about the pesky little detail, like maybe they have the caps lock key on. So this function actually returns a text string or a text list, a text stack of the active keys, so that you can just say like valpause valpause mod key shift, valpause mod key caps lock, right? If you're looking for that, I don't know who would use caps lock as a trigger key, but it's there. I've color coded it here so it's easier to see. Does anyone have any questions about this one? Because it's pretty long. Has anyone ever run into this issue where you think just 8 and then somebody says, but it didn't work? So, because I don't want to have to figure it out, and personally, I don't tend to use the text version as often as some other developers do. I love this though because it's a constant, it's a reference, it's always in my custom functions and I can look and find those values. So with this in mind, I'm preferring the speed of numeric evaluations whenever possible. And of course, I also have a shift and an option bullet option. And a shift is the easiest one because a shift is 1. So basically any odd number that's returned, they have their shift key down, right? And then option, of course, there is a range, or 2 ranges actually, where you would find option. Okay, so some custom functions, like my bulleted shortcuts, are simple enough that they don't require much, if any, explanation. Obviously, today doesn't require a lot of explanation, right? This is not true of most custom functions. It's for this reason that most of the custom functions that I've shared with you so far have included documentation headers that are much longer than the functions themselves. And you may have noticed that not every header includes the same categories because not all are always applicable. So at minimum, I want to know when and by whom the function was added. Even better if I can see why, or in conjunction with which project or ticket it was added. I personally tend to think of our internal documenting of custom functions and scripts and calcs and things like that as being a fairly recent phenomenon. But I've been pleased to find comments that go back as early as like 2017, maybe even 2016, definitely 2018. So we've been doing it longer than I feel like we've been doing it. But what we have added to what we usually add is we have started adding a ticket number. When we make a change or we add something, we add the actual ticket number so that when somebody comes back and says, why did you do this? Right? We have not a paper trail, but we have a trail. We have somewhere to look. And we want to know who did something because we might have a question about it. It's not that we're looking for who to blame. So we want to know who to talk to, right? And unless it's in a category of bullet simple, I always try to include the simple explanation of what the function does. In this case, the function converts spreadsheet column text like A, B, C, E, Y, etc., into their sequential number value. A is 1, B is 2, so on. Okay. I also have a column,
Literally just made one of these last night.
and I have
Literally
the
just did one of these.
and I have the reverse function as well.
Nice.
If you find a problem, I'll chat with you later. There was a problem with the function where it worked for the first 26 letters, and then it worked for the next 25 letters, but from that point on, the 26th letter of each group was the same value as the first letter in the next column. I don't know what the problem actually turned out to be, but Jeremy fixed it. So I said, "Hey, Jeremy, look at this. I think this is right." And I look at it and I see the same formula that I had there before.
Right.
But anyway, he did tweak it just a little bit for me because I found a problem with it. But I do have the reverse as well that will, which wasn't broken. That's the one that you can give it the number and it will return the text value for you. Okay, so I also like to provide at least one example. In this case, I gave a few examples because I wanted to show that it's really working, right? And what it's really doing. I like to show the example with the inputs and the corresponding results because this is not helpful documentation. If you read that, would you be able to tell what this does? Or what kind of result you would get with those inputs?
Not easily.
Not without deciphering the formula. And I don't want to have to do that to figure out what it does or whether I should use it. So don't do this. No one in this room did this, by the way. Just saying.
I thought
That is not documenting your solution. All that is recording the inputs that you used when you tested this calc in your data viewer. And that is not helpful to anyone but you. So don't ever do this.
True. That's not true.
Really? Speak up. I'm listening. Someone said this isn't true. It has been my experience. Okay, moving on. Scripting. So as with custom functions, I find it very helpful to begin a script with information about its purpose. Then throughout the script, I describe what's being done and add spacing to create visual groupings. And most of the people in this room do the same thing. That's great. Other people should do it too. For complex scripts, I often begin with the comments, actually creating an outline of the logic, and that informs me while I'm building it out, and then it remains as documentation. What's the sequence of events that's happening here? I'm also a huge fan of incorporating logical numbering for sequential segments, which you can see in this example. I think that's the example that shows it. Yes. OK equals 1, we do this. OK equals 2, we do that. And then within 2, we have 2.1 and 2.2, or 2.A and 2.B. I can't see from here, but you get the idea. So looping dialogues. Oftentimes we present a dialogue that requires input. Not just button selection, but actual, someone's got to type something in. And we have to test it. Sometimes they have to put in a date, and then we have to validate the date. Did they put in the right, is it actually a date, or did they leave it blank, or did they just put a space in it so it's not empty, but it's not got data either, right? So the way I like to handle these is with a loop. So I put the dialogue inside of a loop. And I start the loop with my exit loop if. This is true if the data's there. Or the last choice was exit or cancel, depending on how you name it, right? Makes it so much cleaner. And then in this example, I've got 2 options. So after the dialogue, if they chose 3, which is cancel in this case, they're going to exit the script. That's easy. But then if it's 2, I'm going to set another variable because 2 in that case was actually a dialogue that had a year already guessed for them on the second button. Okay, and of course it's going to populate the variable that's being tested for in the exit loop. Also, while I don't have any screenshots of examples here, I think this says it all. Please, error trapping is important, but I'm finding more and more that pre-testing for the errors makes as much, if not more, sense. If you're doing a go to related records and there aren't any, right? Now that doesn't work if you're doing a go to related records on a found set where some have related records and some don't, because maybe you're on one that doesn't. So your test isn't necessarily going to work, right? So your test has to, in that case, be your error trapping. But if you can test before, do it. If you don't need to set that field 10 times because it's already got the value that you intend to put in there, don't do it. Test beforehand and minimize the work that's being done and the churn, if you will.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes.
When you do test for errors, actually test for a specific error. So like I've seen stuff in code before where what the developer meant to test for was something like is found count greater than 0, right, after they perform a find.
Mm-hmm.
But instead they just go if get last error is 0.
Mm-hmm.
Because they assume that the only error that could happen is no records found,
Right.
which is a correct assumption the majority of the time,
Mm-hmm.
but I've run into issues having to, fix stuff later where the code is going forward and doing stuff because it didn't encounter an error, or an error happened that we actually don't care about.
Right.
Right. Some other error happened, but our found count was still greater than 0, so we should be fine to continue.
It is important to, it's very important to place your test for the error in the right place. We had a situation recently where I found a script where someone had added, at the very beginning of the script, the first step was if error and some variable is set, exit script with the result of 401. Now 401 was hard-coded. No mention of what script is calling this as a subscript, and how do you get an error at the start of the script? Isn't it, nothing's happened yet. We haven't found out who wrote that. It's not harming anybody else, but be careful about where you put that error test. Yes, Paul?
One thing to watch with error tests, just a get last error, is that if there's a script trigger that happens on a mode change, that can totally interfere with an error returned from, for instance, not finding any records.
That is an excellent point. That's an excellent point. So sometimes you have to capture your error at the point that it's encountered and save it in a variable so that you can recall it later and know that it happened. That's a good point. Okay.
Another thing I'll quickly add,
Yeah.
with errors on server-side scripts, so say you've got a script that is 10 lines long, an error is encountered on, line 6, right? But none of these subsequent script steps clear that get last error, right? If they're right, because there are some script steps that don't clear that get last error.
Yes.
That last error that was encountered stays with that script and then gets reported back to the scripting engine on server, and the script schedule stuff in the admin console will show that script schedule failed because the last error that script finished with a error being still reported. So I recently had that where the script was running successfully, but maybe it was something like go to record next, and there wasn't one.
Right.
And then it's like, the script failed. So I had to add like a commit or something at the very end of the script just to clear that error.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes too, like you mentioned, Eric, you'll have errors that you don't care about. And I write a lot of scripts that have sequential steps. And sometimes they're sequential just because that is the order I put them in. Sometimes they're sequential for a reason. So sometimes it matters that OK1 failed, and therefore we shouldn't move on. But maybe it's okay if OK 2.1 fails, but not OK 2.2, right? So if we care, I will keep a number that my comment of this is 2.1 would be in a variable instead. And so I would know what step I'm on at that point, and the error that I record would go, if I'm on step 2, it would go into error repetition 2 variable. So that at the end, if that's what's appropriate, I can test for, do I have any errors, or do I have an error here or there, and whether or not I report that back. Okay, moving on. So next thing here is periodic screen refreshing. I don't know if any of you have watched a looping script go through, 3 million records doing something slow, not have any idea where you're at. Sometimes you can see a little slider on the side, but sometimes it moves so like micro milliliters or millimeters or whatever it is. You can't see it. So I will insert these steps at the end of a script loop, just before the end loop, so that every so many records my screen refreshes and I can at least see what record I'm on. I use that, and I set that, I might vary the level, that's why I'm showing two different things here. Also, if you're I did a script just last week where my loop was omitting records and just left me with the found set of what needed to be fixed. Well, if get record number equals 200 and my results are less than 200, I'm never going to get refreshed. So in that case, I will increment a counter and use the counter as my refresh point, so that I can see where it's at. I use this, so if I set it at 200, because I think that's going to be pretty fast, then I can time how long did it take to refresh that many records. Then I can project how long the whole thing's going to take. And that can be very helpful. Can I run down the hall? Can I get a cup of coffee? Can I go to lunch? Or do I need to stand here and hover? Okay. Another way to do periodic screen refreshing is like this. This is one of our solutions that the billing process can take a very long time, but it's all happening server side. The user puts in the dates, the months that they want processed, and they hit setup. If they have that little checkbox in the upper left that says autocomplete checked, which they never uncheck, only I would uncheck it, and I never took it away from them, they just hit setup and it goes. They can close this window, they can go home and come back the next day, reopen it, and it will tell them where they're at. So, and then while it's running, it will update. And so I know here that I am on step 1 of 6 of this particular segment of the process. And then when it's all done, everything's updated, and we know how long it took, and we can access the records that resulted from it. So your screen refreshing can be UI, or it can be backend. Most of the time it's backend. You're not usually going to have a script where a user is going to see your screen refresh because it hit 200 records being updated. The next one is perform script on server, a self-running perform script on server script. So if the script is run locally, that first step is if not is server, then run this as PSOS. My same script with my same parameters, run me over there. And then this test here doesn't include the exit step afterwards, but because there is nothing that would happen afterwards in this case. Usually it's embedded within more things, so it might be followed by an exit script. But maybe it's running PSOS waiting for the results, in which case you wouldn't exit, write it the way you would need to for the circumstances that you're writing it for. But if it is the server, then your else if comes in, else if is server, right? Actually, it didn't need the else if test. It could have just been else. I was just being, well, I don't think I was being more, whoever wrote this was being more explicit. I'm not sure if I wrote this or not. Right. But your else or your else if would include whatever it's supposed to do on the server side. Sometimes that test for is server is just to determine whether or not it needs to do a go to layout before it starts. Because of course context matters, right? Okay, we are getting close to overtime, so I'm going to go really quick here. This first image shows the organization of subscripts that all run as part of a nightly server-side script. Parent script first, followed by the major subroutines and their subscripts. And next we see script groupings by when and why they're run. And here we see that all scripts related to the mouse wheel feature are prefixed with MW. So whatever pattern you follow, stick with it, and it'll be easier for you and everyone else. I'm a fan of what we see on the left over here for large, complex, sequential types of operations. Okay, let's see, self-explanatory script names. The script name itself describes the behavior that's expected for each of the parameter options it's expecting. This particular script I use a lot because it allows me to decide whether or not a user can enter a field, edit a field, see something, not see something, and it has three options. 0 will not allow them to edit. It won't keep them out of the field though. So they could like copy a number, they could copy an address, but they can't edit it. What will happen if it's 0 is it will do the undo redo and it will revert. And that's super important for things like value lists that are shown as checkboxes and radio buttons, because if you're running a trigger, for example, that says on enter, that's not going to happen when you think it is, because it is the actual modification of the data that triggers the on enter. By that time, your data has already been modified. So I use this a lot. Okay, some utility and modal scripts that I use often are close popover. And this sounds kind of silly because isn't there just a script step that you can attach to a button that says close popover, right? Or in a script step, just add the script step, close popover. But what I found is that if you use just the step close popover, that popover button is lit up as though it's still depressed. It's got like a highlighted circle in it, you know, and so it needs a commit. And rather than trying to train everyone to always include a commit after the close popover step, I just created a close popover script. And everywhere that we do close popover, we just use a script. That way, if they ever change the way it works, we'll just change this. Super simple. Okay. Next one that I use, we all use a lot, is find ID list. This, we won't read all the details, but basically all we have to feed it is the layout we want to end up on and the stack of IDs we're looking for. And it will do the right thing. It will go to that layout. If you have specified a particular field that you want it to search as a variable that you've submitted with your set in your parameter, then it will populate that field. Otherwise, it will come up with the record ID, the CID, which is that's our unique key at Harmonic that we use, and it will search that field. Yeah, so it just enters find mode and it loops through the stack and does the find. I just the other day had a list in the data file of expenses, and there were over 11,000 expenses. I have a button on there that says open these in the UI. Well, you can't do a go to related record to a file that where that base table doesn't live, right? So my show these in the UI, gathered up the IDs and opened that list, and I didn't even see a pause. It just happened. So this is very, very fast. Next is sub-open window. This includes all of the options you might want for opening a window. You can feed it what type of window you're opening. Are you opening a document? Are you opening a dialogue? Are you opening a card? And if you look closely, you'll see that it says WinDoc on that first test. If not empty WinDoc, well, that is the title that's going to end up on the window. And because we populated WinDoc instead of WinCard, or WinModal, I think is the other one. Yeah, WinDoc, dialogue, or card. Whichever option you chose to populate is the type of window that it's going to open. And it does everything that you would want it to do. It includes all the different options, and you can set a number of different variables. I didn't include screenshots of all that because I knew we wouldn't have time. The next really cool thing that I like to use is a little tool I created in one of our files called Cutover Progress. I don't know how often the rest of you have to do this kind of thing, but if we do a major build, we might have a lot of backfills to run and other things that are going to happen, scripts that are going to have to run. We did a very major build a year or more than a year ago now that had to do a lot of backfills. We basically rebuilt an entire AP bookkeeping system. And so a lot of things had to happen there. Well, one of the things we had to know is how long is this going to take? If we say we're going to do this build on Friday, will it be done by Monday? We hope so. So I had to do a lot of testing. And if you have to manually run this script and that script and this script, or you create one parent script that does it all, you're not necessarily going to get the results in the times that you need when you want to see them as they're being done. So I built this, and it works dynamically. You just name the script that you want to run, and if you want it to refresh every so often, you just tell it how often do you want it to refresh, how many records you want it to refresh, and it will loop through them using perform script by name, and it will return the durations, times, and any results that came from these scripts. Now, that does require that you put a few steps in those scripts so that it feeds back and that it knows that it's supposed to be working this way. If anyone is interested in that information, I'll be happy to put a file together and share it. Here's another example. This one, the first one took over 30 hours. Did a little optimizing, decided, well, we don't need those other ones. This takes 20 hours still. This one took 1 second, but it was easier to do it here if it had to be done repeatedly to test it and then do it later than to actually manually run those 4 scripts. And I've used it as recently as October 30th of this year for something that took 2.5 hours. But because it's running, I can leave it alone. It's also good for cutover scripts and things that involve exports and imports with multiple files that you cannot run on server. Okay, next, setting up the developer environment. We have one project that I haven't shown anything from yet. And this one is something where we have to open like 4 different windows because we got to look at the information here and got to compare how it ended up, it goes from here to here to here, and then it ends up in a dashboard over here. And we kind of need to see all of them. So I found myself every time I go into this every day, I would be opening these different windows and resizing them and everything. So I just built a little script that does it. A little utility script that opens all the right windows. It does the right font, goes to the right layout if you're not already there. It does all the right stuff that needs to happen. Opens the windows, positions them where you want them, and it happens in, I don't know, how fast, Alex? It's pretty quick because it's actually also running some scripting that sets up a bunch of parameters and variables that you need because it involves a virtual list. So it's doing some building as well, but I didn't have to do it. I just had to select the script, and everything is the way I want it. This is an example. I'll just go through real quick. It goes by itself real quick of a script that includes both the dialogue loop. It's also got the self-performed script on server, and it's progressive. And so the steps in it are numbered and document it. And I think the documentation is probably the most important part. Documenting and outlining it also helps you reduce redundancies because it's a lot easier to see them that way. Okay, a couple calcs, we're almost done. So first, evaluate. We're all familiar with evaluate. It's been around a long time now, relatively speaking. My personal use of evaluate, which I use a lot, has been focused on the expression. I've always just totally ignored those other optional variables, like what, I don't know what they do. I don't know. I mentioned this to Paul yesterday, and he's like, you didn't know that? It's like, I've only been doing this for 35 years, but I just noticed recently like in the last couple of years, that, oh my gosh, I can stop creating calcs that start with let trigger equals 1. Let trigger field equals 1, and then the calc I want to do. I can actually trigger something based on these options. And that's especially important when what you're looking for is a change that's been made, and maybe that change was that the field was cleared. So you can't actually say let trigger equal this field, because if it was cleared, it's going to be null. And it's not going to trigger, right? So evaluate with the identifying which fields were modified, and those will be the only things that trigger this, unless you manually edit the field. That test will only run. The most common one that we use is a timestamp that we set when certain fields have been modified so that we can transfer that data to MySQL for the web. And it's literally evaluate, and then in quotes, get current host timestamp. And then it's followed by a bracketed list of the fields that we care about. And it's great. So, okay, next is while. And this next screen is going to look all gobbledygook because I just ran out of time. But I will tell you what I did, and it's much cooler than what that screen looks like. So I mentioned earlier the column values, the column num, column text, column val. We had 155 columns of data that were being evaluated in a virtual list table, and that was great. And they used dynamic calcs that were being evaluated. All that was wonderful. But then we had to evaluate all those results that were in the virtual list. Sometimes we had to sum a column. Sometimes we had to count the column. Sometimes we had to count it based on certain parameters, like count the ones that are top 30, count the ones that aren't top 30. Some of the ones that are top 30, some of the ones that aren't. So we ended up with, and these were all fields named like A, B, C, D, all the way through EY. There were 155 of them. There were up to 21 different suffixes that could be added to the column. And they were all getting set into variables that then ended up permanently being stored in the dashboard's JSON. All that worked great. But how do you clear them? Because they're all global variables. And there's a reason why they needed to be global variables. So I had to write a script. Well, I'm sure you've all seen the script that's a loop and you clear your 5 variables, right? Well, that wasn't going to work. That was like, there's no way I would get them all. And so I used a while statement to loop through the 155 columns and create a text blob, if you will, that basically was the let statement that cleared all the 21 options for each of 155 columns. All it is one set variable. And boom, everything's clear and clean. So that's what that would have shown if you had seen all of it. If I had finished that one slide. And then the last thing is, we're talking about the while. The other thing with while is, because it's still fairly new, and I don't remember what all the parts are or what order they go in, I like to do one of these two things. I either comment it out and then I add another one and build it so that I can see it, or I do what you see in the second example, which is I just add returns and I work underneath them, and then they stay there and I leave them there, right? I might even modify them, like you'll see instead of initial variable, I put initial variables. Just remember that it's not just one, it could be any number of them, etc. So, and I added the continue if true. That's what condition means. Condition doesn't mean stop. I always got confused by recursive functions where you put the test before or after. How does it, yada. So I make it clear to myself, and that's it. Okay, this is the example of a typical looping script that would clear your existing variables. This is the actual while statement, and a little bit of close up there. It was not nearly as long or as complicated as I thought it was going to be. And next and last is script triggers. Nope. You will have to wait for Claris and Gage to talk about script triggers. Where I will be presenting best practices and practical real-world examples for script triggers. In addition to another session on UX titled
Designed, sealed, and delivered.
Yes, designed, sealed, and delivered.
Just so everybody knows, that's not the Apple facility where we will be meeting.
Right.
We're not getting the good stuff.
This is, however, the campus that they included in the template slides.
Oh, of course.
It's not that image, but it is that same building.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the awesome.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
So that is it. I'm sorry we went a little bit over.
Okay, we can do So Taylor did want to mention about the perform script on server,
Yes.
that he tests for whether or not the perform script on server fails. To put error capture around on it, he says it can fail due to maximum settings on the server, on the FMS, which will become an issue with mostly larger implementations, as you probably know.
We ran into that recently because you can, my mind is a blank for the right word.
You spam the server with PSOS
Yes.
connections if they get fired off.
Essentially, you can so granularize your scripting such that you blow up the server.
Yes.
But you'll find out real quick. We did. Anyway, that's all I've got. So thank you very much,
Of course.
and look forward to February.
Going back to very early in your presentation about the graph. One of the things that we do is the first thing we do is we set up a little text box at the top that has our key, and we have 4-letter codes for every table that's in the system, and that way we can kind of find out where we are, no matter where we are. The other one goes back to, and this is something that somebody else mentioned in the chat, was that for cascading deletes,
Yes.
we find that because we use 4-digit or 4-letter, what we'll do is we'll just, for all of those, we'll have a separate area of those, completely different TOs, and everything will be prefaced with a lowercase x. So it'll be lowercase x and 4-letter, whatever, and we know if it starts with an x, we know that's a cascading delete from there. And that tends to work out pretty well for us because we can keep the colors the same, but you know right away it is not a regular TO that you're dealing with in that. So
I do wish that they would show a little icon. It's just a little box that you can use to open it,
yeah,
which you don't need if you have keystroke.
yeah,
I'm a fan of keystroke shortcuts.
yeah. A lot of people are very hunt and pecky though, you know. So. No offense. It's how you want to work.
Actually, though, if they did add an icon, it would really have to be on the relationship line because you can have multiple table occurrences that are related to some table occurrences that don't have it. So it really is relationship specific. Maybe the line could be red, but it would be gradient, right? So it would be black and white.
There's just a lot of information to sort of encapsulate in everything that we look at on those ERDs. So it's just feel like anything that we do is going to end up being like what we see in layout mode, where we have all these little icons. And I don't know about anybody else, but once I hit like 48 or so, like I couldn't see any of that stuff anymore.
See, I love those icons, but I'm also not 48 yet, so.
That was at the point where I was like, hey, I had great vision up until then. And then, like, all of a sudden I can't see these things, and I'm like, well, now I guess I just got to get a bigger screen, right? It must be the screen. They must have made those icons smaller on me or something. Okay. If there's no other questions we're going to go over, I'm just going to go ahead and close this out. Next month's meeting is going to be Taylor, and Taylor is going to be talking about connecting FileMaker apps to other FileMaker apps using the FileMaker API, which for any of us who have done that, we know that comes with its own set of unique and interesting challenges. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you to Harmonic for hosting us yet again in their lovely new facility here. See everybody next month.